course, everybody knows that you're part of Midwestern Marx Institute, and they have been receiving some major censorship as of late. I think you guys have done 7 different TikToks accounts, and they've all been taken down by TikTok. If you can talk about that and explain to us what happened.
For sure. I definitely appreciate you reaching out and giving us your platform to talk about it. Because, I just wanted to somehow get the word out there because, we take it on the chin being censored because it's happened so many times, and we recognize as revolutionary socialists this is going to happen. We're going to get censored from time to time, but it's still infuriating, to just be censored when your message is reaching so many people on the most popular social media app in America, which is what TikTok is right now, and they could just wipe it out, destroyed, hours and hours of our work, of our content. So this is the 7th account that we've had permanently banned. We appealed a couple of the bans, the ones that they would allow us to appeal, and TikTok manually reviewed it and their decision and chose to keep our accounts down. So the longer we've been going, the more quickly it's been happening. So the first account that we had 375,000 followers. That's why it's so frustrating that they took this away. It was a great platform for reaching people. And people are hungry for the, revolutionary message, you can tell, which is why they have to censor us. But we had 375, and then the next one had 120,000. We had like 3 other accounts with 20,000 followers. And then this recent one, we posted like 2 videos, and they immediately started blowing up. People started sharing them, liking them, and our account got banned. We appealed it. TikTok reviewed it and kept it down. Now, what's interesting is that Mint Press News, who's a really good independent outlet, Alan McLeod is one of their journalists who does really good work for them. They published an article and did some investigative reporting, finding that a bunch of, here you go. Yeah, there's the article. TikTok, their content managers are a bunch of former national security agents and literal NATO operatives. And similar thing with Twitter, as this article points out. But this means that the people manually reviewing our content and deciding whether to keep it up or put it back up or keep it down are literal NATO operatives who probably open our account and see us talking about the proxy war in Ukraine, see us criticizing NATO and calling them what they are, an imperialist apparatus that serves Western finance capital. And, that's why they shut us down. I mean, that's the only answer we really have. That, and then there are a whole bunch of Dem Talk creators is what they call themselves. So Democratic TikTok, whole bunch of those liberal content creators who mass reported us and told their fans to mass report us, just a handful. But that did not help either. So targeted campaign to silence our TikTok. It's what we've been dealing with. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a part in here where it talks about how the United States, that the White House had brought in, I think it was about 30 different of some of the top TikTok accounts, and met with them in order to tell them, what the talking points were. And, of course, you're going to have a lot of people who want to follow these accounts. And in doing so, they, will push back against any talk about anything that talks about taking down the system. I have to be very careful in my language, because even just over the weekend, we got a letter from the Tube about what we can talk about regarding the proxy war. So even still, we have to be very careful, even just on this platform. But I was talking to some of my comrades at RBN because we want to reestablish our TikTok account, and I used Midwestern Marx as an example. As if we revamp our TikTok account, it will get taken down. We can be as very careful and measured as possible. use clean language, everything, but they still will take it down because you're challenging the imperial core. You're challenging NATO. You're challenging the oppressor class, and their fight for U.S. hegemony, for Western hegemony within this world. So that's one of the reasons why we have to be very careful, and we have to realize that they are going to come after us because, despite what a lot of people think, Twitter is not on and popping like it used to be. It's TikTok now, and that's where the kids are watching. And so how do you affect the future? You go where the kids are, I believe the children are our future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. So that's the thing. You have to, and the thing is that you're influencing kids. And now a lot of these people in the oppressor class are freaking out because they're like, oh my God, kids are now turning more towards socialism and communism. And I'm like, we didn't do that. We're just a guide. You guys are the ones who actually did it because you guys have kept this capitalist system in place so much to the point where kids are now looking at communism and socialism. They're like, wait a minute, you guys demonize this stuff, but from what we look at, capitalism is pretty terrible.
That's such a good point. That's what I think every time we get banned or every time, people get mad at me, they'll say I'm spreading misinformation or whatever. And that's what the Democratic liberal creators will say when they mass report our account. But like you said, it's just because the kids recognize that the system around them isn't working. And they're hungry for a message that preaches something different or that, says we can have something different and better, to the point where the youth aren't, one, they haven't been indoctrinated with McCarthyite anti-communist propaganda their whole lives the same way baby boomers have. But second, that propaganda isn't working because they say, well, people starve under communism. There's bread lines and there's wars or whatever. And the kids are like, there's all those things under capitalism. Like we had bread lines during COVID the entire time. What do you mean? It's their only option is to just totally wipe our account off the map like they've done with 7 of our TikTok accounts. And like you said, we just need to be aware that that's going to be a thing. A couple other interesting things that are mentioned in the Mint Press news article. For one, TikTok wiped out 30,000 accounts, I believe was the number, for Russian misinformation or Russian propaganda, which, we've learned can mean pretty much anything. There was an article from the New York Post the other day called "Left-Wing Think Tank Responsible for Thousands of Fake Russia Stories." And it was basically just it was a liberal think tank made up of folks like Bill Kristol and John Podesta and a bunch of people close to the Clintons and Obama who were communicating with Twitter and identifying any account that was critical of NATO, identifying any account that was calling out the U.S. proxy war in Ukraine and calling them Russian bots, Russian propagandists, Russian misinformation. And they were working together with Twitter to get them to wipe out a bunch of accounts. And eventually Twitter said, no, the accounts you're giving us aren't even Russian misinformation. We're not just going to wipe out any accounts you want. But TikTok went right along with what NATO wanted. TikTok just wiped all these accounts off the face of the map, which was the face of the earth, which was probably the first time our account got banned. And then since then, NATO has sunk their hooks into TikTok as much as they can. But we're seeing this everywhere. We're seeing a concerted effort by think tanks and political actors and social media oligarchs, or really more an effort by the finance capitalists and the NGOs they control to control social media and control the algorithm and control what kids are seeing. So this is just another aspect of that.
Yeah. It says here, who works on TikTok's trust and safety policy, is also an ex-NATO man. Copeland previously worked as a desk officer for NATO as well as for the Department of Defense. Between 2011 and 2021, he also worked for U.S. contractor Development Alternatives Incorporated, DAI, spending much of that time in Afghanistan. The DAI has long been accused of being a CIA front group, perhaps with some justification. In 2009, for example, DAI agent Alec Gross was arrested in Cuba and sentenced to 15 years in prison for spying, espionage, and his part in efforts to destabilize the government. So these are the type of people who are literally working for TikTok. And the thing is that, and a lot of times, there's this thing that a lot of people are saying that, oh, well, we got to be careful on TikTok because on TikTok, the Chinese own TikTok, and they're talking about how, we got to be careful because of China, and it's like all this anti-China rhetoric, and it's like, wait, TikTok isn't even owned by China. That's the crazy part. Like, wait, what are you talking about?
Right.
TikTok is owned by Oracle, I think it is.
Yeah, and that was something that the U.S. government made them do. Like, I think TikTok in China is still owned by the Chinese company ByteDance, but then the U.S. said we're going to ban the app unless you hand over management of all your servers to this company in Texas, Oracle. So like you said, it's not even owned by China, and people accuse China's government of being authoritarian and banning free speech or censoring free speech. That's exactly what our government is doing. Our government forced TikTok to hand the management of their own company over to an American company so that NATO operatives could censor content because people like us were blowing up. So, it's everything the U.S. Accuses China of doing. It always tends to be projection, something that we're actually doing in reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is the article that you sent me from the New York Post says left-wing think tank responsible for thousands of fake Russia stories, the new Twitter files.
Yeah, this was covered. I believe Jimmy Dore and Gray Zone and all them covered this too, but obviously it was in a mainstream outlet, the New York Post. I mean, they call it, a left-wing think tank, but like I said, it's Democratic Party higher-ups along with Bill Kristol, who is one of the leading architects and propagandists for the Iraq War. And they were working directly with Twitter. Hamilton 68 dashboard was the name of this list of Russian bot accounts that they put out. But Twitter started, the people who work at Twitter started saying, well, we can't just start banning people en masse. And also, there's no evidence that any of these accounts are Russian bots. Like, you just made that up about accounts that you don't like, accounts that are critical of the proxy war. So Twitter, or some people at Twitter, smelled what was going on and kind of put a stop to it. And now all this information has been leaked. It's all been released to the public, so we can see that this government, State Department connected think tank, finance capital connected think tank, was pressuring Twitter to censor people by lying about those people, claiming those people were bots. And then this story has even more meaning when you know that TikTok did wipe 30,000 accounts off their app for being Russian bots, Russian misinformation. So, this story got blown up, and some good people at Twitter could smell something fishy going on, and now people know that this was BS. But on TikTok, 30,000 accounts were removed, and we'll never know if they were actually Russian bots or not. So, yeah, there's no freedom of speech. Your First Amendment rights are not protected in the dictatorship of capital that we live under.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and funny thing, a lot of people, talk about, like, me and Sabby have had this conversation, and we've always thought that either one of two things should happen to Twitter. Either one, Twitter is completely worker-owned and it's operated as such, or it is, nationalized as a institution, just like a utility, and, is owned, by the entire country. And so you either have one of the two of those. And then you get a lot of people with pushback who will say, well, you want the government to own it? I'm like, well, look what the government does. And I'm like, too late. The government already oversees everything. So my thing is like, the problem though is that TikTok can do it because they are private corporations, so they can go under that guise and go because of the recommendations of the government. But if TikTok were a an institution that was, a utility, then they couldn't do some of the things that they could do legally because it would be considered, against free speech. And so, but at the same time, I don't trust it, to be well regulated within the capitalist system anyway. What we're really talking about isn't a more egalitarian, more equitable system, economic system, instead, of having it, within the system that we have now. So, but even still, like, even if we were to change the system, I would think, companies like TikTok and Twitter and Facebook and ones like that should be public utilities and managed as such. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I would agree. Agree with everything you said. I mean, it would be hard for the state to manage it right now, but that's because our state is controlled by oligarchs. Our state is controlled by bankers and finance capitalists. So we want to, the whole idea is that the workers would take power of the state and make it a state that serves our interests, serves the working class. Any government, any state represents or develops out of the economic system at the core, the relations of production. So right now we have capitalist relations of production. The capitalist class controls the state. But if you had a workers controlled state, it would function a lot more efficiently. Because, anything that the government does for working people right now, they're constantly trying to cut and constantly trying to dismantle. And corporate lobbyists are constantly influencing the government. So we have to get rid of all that, which, revolutionary socialism would do. But yeah, eventually they should be regulated as public utilities, or even before a transition to socialism, that would still be better to regulate it as a public utility. 'Cause it's so weird how people, especially like conservatives in this country, claim to support freedom of speech. And that's their big thing, the First Amendment. Freedom of speech. We can't have socialism because then the government would infringe on my freedom of speech. But then when the corporations infringe on our freedom of speech, they're just like, oh, well, they're a private company. They can do what they want. It's like, okay, so this handful of private companies owns everything and they can censor everybody they want because they're private. Like, how is that any worse or any better than government censorship? It's like, as long as it's something that the government isn't doing, these libertarians or right wingers are okay with it. They're fine with it. 2 thumbs up to corporate censorship. And it's like, that should be considered bad too. I mean, that should almost be considered worse if the capitalists are censoring our speech based on what's in their interests. So yeah, it needs to be regulated and way more transparent. Like, so many decisions are being made behind the scenes. TikTok made the decision to wipe out 30,000 accounts behind the scenes. The government was pressuring Twitter to do that behind the scenes. Facebook censored the Hunter Biden laptop story behind the scenes because they were pressured by the FBI and only talked about it like 3 years later. So all of these decisions right now are being made behind closed doors by capitalists, by shareholders, and people who are invested in these social media companies. So the only solution is to have it be publicly owned, have the government regulate it. And like we're saying, under socialism, the government would work in our interest, so it wouldn't be inefficient or have the same incentive to censor working class and anti-imperialist voices.
But Eddie, you mean tell me that Elon Musk isn't doing a good job?
The savior of freedom of speech.
He comes in on a white horse to save us from freedom of speech. Oh my goodness. Yeah, and it's funny. A lot of people seem to be more cool with corporate dictatorship versus the dictatorship of the proletariat. Either way you go, you're going to have a dictatorship. It depends on who you want dictating the laws and the policies of the country. Do you want just a small, tiny group of super rich pricks to rule over you to say what you can and can't say? Or should it be done in a more larger democratic fashion amongst the working people, the working masses, in order to be able to dictate what we can and can't have? I honestly go on the side of a flourishing democracy to choose versus it being at the hands of some corporatists to, some oligarchs that really don't have our best interests at heart.
Absolutely. I mean, the word Carlos has a good way of breaking this down. My partner runs Midwestern Marks with me, website partner. He has a good way of breaking it down where he basically says, he goes through the etymology, the origins of the word dictator, and it just basically means who owns the power, who has the public power. So we consider a dictator to be, you know, an authoritarian leader who does all these horrible things, human rights abuses. But originally, the word just means who has state power. And as Ingalls lays out in his very, very short work that everybody should read, it's like less than 3 pages, called On Authority. There's always going to be an economic class who has state power. There's always going to be someone who's in control of that government state apparatus. It's just a question of, like you said, is it a handful of finance capitalists who control that state apparatus, a handful of bankers and imperialists, or is it the masses of the working people? Right? You have this minority class of capitalists who make up a tiny, tiny minority of society based on the fact that they own the majority of the means of production. And then you have this vast class of workers, the masses. So do you want the masses of society, the majority of society to decide what happens? Or do you want this tiny people who are in a special group because they're rich and because they own every factor of production in the country? Like, of course, people would want the democracy, but they hear the word dictatorship of the proletariat or hear the word dictator. And it scares them. But, you know, there is no democracy without a dictatorship of the proletariat. Because if you try and just move towards democracy, the capitalists will use the state authority to crush you. They'll crush the revolution using violence, using the police, using the military, whatever else. So if we don't seize that state apparatus, if we don't seize the authority and use it to build a democracy, they're going to use the authority to crush democracy.